So, Rich, I watched some movies with my daughter over the weekend. Actually, it started last Thursday. You want to guess what movie we started with? And what movie, here, I'm going to ask you a question. What movie has a second and third version of that movie that was a kid's movie that we probably watched growing up? Do you have any guesses?
I think I know what direction you're going in, but I don't want to spoil it for the audience.
No, what direction do you think we're going in here?
I think it's Homeward Bound.
It was not Homeward Bound. It was not Homeward Bound. Homeward Bound was last year. I talked about Homeward Bound. We watched Free Willy. Free Willy. Did you know that Free Willy had 3 versions of it?
I did. Free Willy is the first movie I ever saw in the theaters.
Oh, wow. Cool. So we watched Free Willy, and unfortunately, we had to rent them. There was like $3.50. And so we watched the first one, decent flick. We watched the second one, but we didn't finish the second one because we went to a friend's place at the lake over the weekend. And we got back. Turns out that rental was only 48 hours long. So just to watch the final 30 minutes of Free Willy 2, to see if Willy dies in an oil fire or not, I had to spend another $4 when I could have just used that on a best ball entry instead. I'm JJ, and last year I tried my hardest to become a best ball bro. I drafted over 500 teams, I talked to some of the most successful best ball players in existence, and I admittedly had mixed results. So this year, I'm going to chase that title once again. My plan is to max enter DraftKings Millionaire Maker, and I'm going to document all of it while talking to the brightest best ball minds on the planet. Last year, I didn't quite get there, but this year, this is going to be the year where I officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 best ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. 1 per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get 1 bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, and I am joined, as always, by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic. One last soccer reference for the summer, I promise. But whatever the opposite of doom scrolling is what I've been doing for the past week, because for the first time in 41 years, JJ, my beloved Tottenham Hotspur have lifted a European trophy, beating Manchester United in the Europa League final in Bilbao, Spain. You cannot wipe the smile off my face.
Cool, man. Sounds really awesome. Sounds great. Soccer, yeah. Awesome.
This is what it sounded like in my house for the last week. My wife Jenna, she's from Trinidad, and all of her brothers are Chelsea supporters. She obviously knows her football, her proper football. And it's not the top tier. It's not Champions League. So all she's been doing is ribbing me the whole time. She's like, that's not even that's like a Mickey Mouse trophy, And it's been brutal.
So basically what you're saying is your favorite soccer team won the XFL championship.
No, it's not, and it's not the NIT either, people. All right. Stop. I'm tired of it.
So it's not the XFL. Sure. Okay, we'll believe you, Rich. We'll believe you. All right, so we've been doing the DraftKings thing especially over the last week since we last chatted with all of you guys. But I've been drafting. I'm only a few flagship contest lineups in because I want to make those and do those live, and I've been working on the draft guide, and obviously Memorial Day happened, so I got to catch up a little bit on that end because I am max entering that tournament, but I am doing slow drafts elsewhere. Rich, have you been digging into the draft and entering the DraftKings streets?
I'll tell you what, the DraftKings streets are tree-lined, white picket fence. The sprinklers are on. Everyone's waving. It's very friendly if you get my draft over on the DraftKings streets.
It's friendly. And I like this. So we have a guest on later on the episode, which we'll do every week. Last week was just me and Rich as sort of an intro, but we do have guests that I interview and talk to every week. And my guest that I spoke to talked about how on DraftKings, you will often find that average draft positions fluctuate a lot more. Like people are not afraid to reach and people aren't afraid. Whereas other platforms, you oftentimes just kind of get in this like robotic, it's the same stuff over and over again because people don't want to lose value on their individual picks. I really appreciate that about the DraftKings platform, honestly.
Yeah, I had some guys that, I was building my favorite stack so far from the week 17 slate based on value and where you can get them is Dolphins and Bucks. And I was setting up a nice little Dolphin stack, and somebody went naked Tua, and that was probably my first tilt session of the summer. First of many to come.
When people hear today's interview, I think that this guest, and I guess I can just reveal the guest now. It's Pat Kerrane, who we started last year's Becoming a Best Ball Bro with. But Kerrane last year, gave us really good insight on stacking and getting that quarterback and making sure that quarterback is the one for your individual lineup, and that sometimes you have to pass on value in order to make that individual lineup look really good. He also has some really good insight for people today on not getting overly tilted about missing out on that quarterback, right? On that specific guy that you sort of like set things up for. So I think that once everyone listens to that, you'll feel a little bit less tilted whenever that inevitably happens to you.
I definitely needed that because JJ, I crashed out, and my last two picks of the draft were Harold Fannin and Deshaun Watson. So I need all the help I can get right now.
Deshaun Watson. Wow. Look at that. Look at that final two. Yeah. I mean, look, I do think that DraftKings, has it's all these different platforms have sort of something unique in terms of, obviously what the game style is, but also the demographic that's playing, on these platforms. Like, one of the things I've noticed on DraftKings, wide receivers aren't going nearly as early as I thought that they would, just given the fact that it's a full PPR format. I think the running back thirst is very real. Did you notice that with some of your drafts
running
you've
backs,
been doing?
They don't get hurt anymore, JJ. I don't know if you got the memo, but they will never get injured ever again, where we've made it.
Yeah, evidently. And then also, and I talk about this a little bit with Kerrane, but I'm surprised that some of the elite quarterbacks aren't going slightly higher. The one guy that I have talked to Kerrane about this, so you guys are going to hear this in a second, but the one guy, and I didn't really plan that. Like I put together the general notes for what Rich and I would talk about, and then I talked to Kerrane, and just so happens there was overlap there. But the one player that I'm shocked by is Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts gets drafted after Joe Burrow in terms of ADP on DraftKings, which is bonkers to me. Like, I don't want to sit here right now in May and say that Burrow's like a fade candidate. Number one, I don't think any quarterback in best ball is really a fade because you're building quarterbacks based on the pass catchers you have. You're building stacks and all that kind of stuff. Like, even the newsletter I sent out last week that once again found itself on Reddit, and people yelled at me on Reddit about Jared Goff being overvalued. That's not really a best ball take, because if you draft Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, you can get Jared Goff and he can have spiked weeks. It's more of a season long take, and noting that, touchdown rates do fluctuate. That's something that I talked about on the late round podcast that released yesterday. But Joe Burrow is also low key a regression candidate. Like I do expect Burrow to throw a lot, but he had a career high in attempts per game last year, and he had a career high in touchdown rate last year. You combine those two things, that's a recipe for something that's not very sustainable, right? Where you have a really high touchdown rate. What's the way to combat touchdown rate? Regression, that is, right? Jared Goff, really high touchdown rate last year. What's the one way to combat that year over year? you just throw more attempts. You throw the ball more. But Joe Burrow doesn't necessarily have that to fall back on. Now, I have him ranked as a QB5 or as the QB5 right now, but that's mostly because there's not other like superstar Jaden Daniels type players that you would automatically rank right after the big four. And I'm just shocked that Burrow is going ahead of Jalen Hurts. I'm assuming it's for stacking purposes. Do you think that would be like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins are going there now? Now they're getting Arizona, so Trey McBride goes there too. So you're game stacking that, and then I'm assuming people just want Joe Burrow and they're forcing it.
It definitely seems inflationary from both a team stack and a game stack perspective that those players are going so early in the first couple of rounds that naturally Burrow is getting this bump because the people that select those players feel like they want to connect the stack and take Burrow. But just in general, even if you disassociate Jalen Hurts from Joe Burrow and just look at him against the player pool, my first snapshot of ADP was on May 12th, so 2 weeks ago when we did our first episode. Hurts has gone back one spot. And I know people out there is like, it's one draft spot, whatever. The only major piece of news that we've had for the last couple of months is that the tush push will remain in the NFL. You would think logically that would have even a modicum positive effect on people selecting Jalen Hurts. They don't care, JJ. I don't get it.
I don't really get it either. Not only that, but I think Philadelphia is going to throw the ball more than they did last year. They had, a situation where things were a little bit clean in terms of game script, stuff like that. And they leaned really heavily on the run. Saquon Barkley was healthy for last season. I mean, what if he's not healthy this year, which we know can happen. And then all of a sudden they're not relying on the run as, I mean, there's outs here where Hurts throws the ball a lot more. Not only that, but like where he goes in drafts, because you can get him into the fifth, right? And you can get AJ Brown oftentimes into the late second. And so matching AJ Brown with Jalen Hurts is not even that difficult right now. And it's wild to me. I mean, Jalen Hurts has been someone that I've gotten a lot of so far.
Yeah. And AJ Brown this morning, the draft I did this morning, AJ Brown fell to me, I don't know. So it was late second round, which seems a bit crazy for a player of his talents. And then I went ahead and I grabbed Josh Allen in the third because he had fallen way too much, and I was going to start a little Buffalo thing. And then I was so mad because Hurts fell. So Hurts fell a full round past his ADP, and I was just losing my mind because again, like Kerrane discussed, I did not allow. I was like, this falling value is so good, but I can't go two quarterback this early in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't have, if you get a guy like Josh Allen. But even Allen, I think, is fine to get. It's weird. I've turned into an early round quarterback disciple after all these years. It's just a wild turn of events here. Nuts.
That goes that you're not, you don't have take lock. That's like the number one thing, right? And you've discussed this previously about younger guys that break in is they find something and they hold on to it with diamond hands. But we need to be fluid with new stuff. We do. Been drafting a lot of different stacks though. One of them in that same range is the 49ers, where George Kittle to me is just unbelievably undervalued at the moment. Where like I like getting Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. That's, don't get me wrong, because I think there is that big three. I talked about this on the projection show a couple weeks ago. But George Kittle, from a projection standpoint, is only 0.1 points per game that separates him and Trey McBride in my projections. Not only that, George Kittle's ahead of Trey McBride in those projections. Not that I'm ranking them that way, but that's how it looks in my projections. He goes well after those tight ends do. And look, I have him ranked as tight end 3, but he shouldn't be going, 2 full rounds the way that he does, after McBride. But then on top of that, the 49ers, like, this is an offense and a scheme that we should just generally feel good about. They just signed Brock Purdy. I know they lost Deebo Samuel, but Deebo Samuel was a shell of himself last year anyway. And Christian McCaffrey's back and hopefully healthy. Ricky Pearsall, now you get into year 2 and, hopefully doesn't have the same tumultuous situation that happened, last offseason where he got off to a slow start for very obvious reasons. Jawan Jennings broke out last year. Brandon Ayuk obviously banged up, but he could come back halfway through the year and be totally fine. I mean, the weapons are still there, and San Francisco's defense is not that strong. I mean, a lot of rankings will have them as a bottom 10 unit in the league. And so I think that there could be a lot of passing in this offense, and you're getting a lot of these guys at reasonable cost. And then Brock Purdy goes after pick 100. So right now, I've been going after 49ers kind of aggressively. Maybe it's partially also because I like the Bears, and I'll get Bear, and that's a good week 17 game in my opinion. But
49ers, man, they've been part of my consideration set pretty strongly so far.
I love that every week somewhere in the show sheet is the name Roma Dunze. You just can't escape this man.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Look, okay. I'm drafting Bears and I'm getting less DJ Moore, more Roma Dunze. And then if I get a Dunze, I'll often go after Luther Burden as well, especially when he slips. But Caleb Williams, I mean, I said it last week. I'll say it again. Caleb Williams is ranked as a high-end QB2. I think he is a mid to low-end QB1, more in that like QB 9 to 11 range than the QB 13 range where he gets drafted. But then on top of that, like you're a player like Caleb should be elevated in ADP a little bit because he has stacking outs, right? So like it's an easy team to generally stack. You know that there's going to be pass catchers that you're getting early and not late, to stack him. So that's going to drive up his price a little bit, like a Jared Goff, let's say, where, Goff gets Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown that can lead to earlier ADPs because teams are going to want to, managers are going to want to draft him earlier. But it's not really happening, in my opinion, with Caleb Williams. So I've gotten a lot of that. And again, maybe that has to do with the 49ers thing and that matchup and me liking the 49ers. But then you could also get Roschon Johnson really late, who Roschon is like an auto click for me right now. Because if they don't sign anyone, if they don't add anyone, he's going to outplay his ADP at this point.
Yeah, the Bears are a perfect example of the divergence between best ball and redraft because we don't need to make the decision weekly as to which Bears pass catcher we're going to play. Yeah. It's just going to decide itself for us. So having those multiple dart throws is actually more beneficial in best ball than in redraft, where it could end up being a headache later in the year.
Yeah, I guess I already mentioned this last stack that I've been going after is the Eagles. I mean, it's a really boring 3 stacks that I'm kind of like going after right now, but it's just based on like 1 or 2 of these players, especially the quarterbacks, just being reasonably priced. But I like the Eagles. Like, I don't think they're going to have as clean of game scripts. AJ Brown will fall further than he should. I've gotten more AJ Brown than Devontae Smith. Hurts often goes into round 5. Dallas Goedert, you can get him really late. Like, Dallas Goedert to me projects as like a low end tight end 1 or a fringe tight end 1. He's tight end 16 right now by ADP. Like Colston Loveland goes like 4 tight end spots ahead of Dallas Goedert, when I think that you could argue, look, nothing against Colston Loveland. I loved him as a prospect. I love him in Dynasty. And I don't even mind him from like a redraft perspective, because I do think there's opportunity for things to kind of like work itself out and him be viable within this within this Bears offense. But we have to be realistic that Colston Loveland's like median outcome, his maybe like 80th percentile outcome is more so Dallas Goedert's median outcome. If we're being, realistic about year 1 tight end performance, I'm the first to tell you that I think that the year 1 tight end, like idea that you fade them in redraft and all that kind of stuff is really overblown, because if you look at players who actually get routes run and actually get the opportunity, they perform fine. There's just a lot of mouths to feed in Chicago. Like, I don't think that we can make the assumption that he's going to be a top 3, target getter in that offense with Luther Burden there. So I'm preferring Dallas Goedert. Like I especially given the environment that we're in, where I'm getting Jalen Hurts a lot, and I can get other Bears players, like a Dunze and a Luther Burden. I've been going more like the Dallas Goedert route, like Goedert over Isaiah Likely, for instance, and Likely goes ahead of Goedert. I think that you can make the argument that Goedert should go ahead of Tucker Kraft, who, that's an offense that spreads the ball around a whole lot. And, he definitely overperformed in the touchdown column last year, which is why I think some people are inflating him a tad. His per route run numbers were fine. They weren't like elite or anything. But yeah, I mean, like I think Dallas Goedert, what I'm saying here is just a little bit undervalued. It just makes this Eagles stack even that more interesting.
It's almost like people are still valuing him as a player that the Eagles might trade, when that's kind of done and dusted with, right? They kicked the can prior to the draft, and then it sounds like during the draft they sat down and had a frank conversation with Goedert, and he said that he wanted to stay. And who is competing with him for targets in this offense at tight end? They put Grant Calcaterra on the field a ton, but his job is to block, and maybe once in a while he'll catch some random seamer or some hitch. But like, are we worried about Kylan Granson, Harrison Bryant stealing meaningful targets away from Dallas Goedert? I don't think so.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that they got Kylan Granson this offseason, which, it's like fine. It's not something that I'm afraid of, from a projectable target standpoint. He should be the number 3 target in that offense. I mean, that's the way things are trending. And, he's been viable in the past. it's one of those players that I don't think I'm going to be as into at all in a regular redraft environment, because I don't think that his, ceiling is like that out of control. But from a best ball perspective, you're just trying to get points. Like, you're just trying to get, and he'll have random spiked weeks. I don't want to have to guess when those spiked weeks are coming, but there's also contingent upside. If one of AJ Brown or Devontae Smith were to go down, Dallas Goedert would see a higher target share. We know that would happen.
And just to circle back and put a pin on this segment, the market is telling me that George Kittle and Sam Laporta are a lot closer than I think they should be. I'm very interested in what's going to happen to the Lions entering the season with the brain drain on both sides of the ball. You talked about Jared Goff this week on the feed and his touchdown regression that might be coming based on his career outlooks, pocket passer trap. So I'm not here to say like the Lions are going to take a step back and not be a top 10 offense this year, but if you're putting an elite player who just performs over and over and over again that has no changes to their offense, and if anything, because of the departure of Deebo Samuel, might get a smaller increase in the pie compared to somebody in Laporta that has there's just question marks on Detroit. We can't deny that I'm taking Kittle in that situation all day.
Yeah, I didn't even, whenever I think about the Lions too and stacking, I haven't really drafted much Laporta so far, and he doesn't even cross my mind in terms, because Kittle is just such a screaming value where he goes that, to me, it makes no sense to fall back. That's a new tier, in my opinion, to go to Laporta. Laporta doesn't look as good in my projections, nearly as good in my projections. I do have him ranked, I think, as tight end 4, but I do think there's a big tier break right there after Kittle. So basically, draft George Kittle, draft Jalen Hurts, hopefully profit. But like I said, we have a guest today, Pat Kerrane, owner of LegendaryUpside.com. He's had insane success as a best ball player in the past. He's been become a millionaire through playing best ball. Talked about what to do with the extra rounds over on DraftKings. Talked a lot about roster construction. Talked a lot about stacking and sort of how he works the late rounds in these DraftKings best ball contests, where is he going after players that complete his stack a little bit more, or is he going after players who are just fun and intriguing and have upside? So we had a deep discussion about all of that. Hopefully you guys enjoy. So without further ado, here's the interview with Mr. Pat Kerrane. All right, Pat, we're talking DraftKings. I'm really curious, like, what's your draft strategy when you go from a half PPR platform, which is what a lot of people are playing with in best ball, to a full PPR one like DraftKings?
I think maybe you would assume that, if you're going from a half PPR platform to PPR, that, you'd be prioritizing the wide receivers a bit more, but that's not really what happens, because we're going from a half PPR platform where people love wide receivers and basically draft it like it's PPR to a actual PPR platform. So it doesn't change that much in the world that we live in. When I hop over on DraftKings, honestly, to some extent, I sometimes break ties like a little bit earlier on to the running backs. On DraftKings, it's a little bit more Wild West in terms of where players are going to go. It's less predictable. People follow ADP less. There's some big reaches. There's some big fallers. And so I kind of like to be a little bit more balanced if I'm in a really extreme build and then I get a faller at a position that I'm already super strong at. That's kind of frustrating and not uncommon. So probably the biggest difference is just understanding that ADP environment is going to be a little bit, there's going to be a bigger like standard deviation in terms of the ADP.
Yeah, so you alluded to this a little bit, but on DraftKings, what I've noticed is that people aren't taking running backs any later, despite it being full PPR. It seems like it's pretty in tune with another platform like a UD. But does this make you want to go more zero RB, or are you, like you just said, like, are you afraid to go with a zero RB approach because there are circumstances that are more unpredictable on a platform like DraftKings, where people might not stop drafting running backs, as they're drafting running backs earlier. Like basically what I'm saying is, like, as I've gotten into DraftKings and the platform and drafting on there, I've just noticed that I will have, like, it's very easy to have really strong wide receivers early because running backs are being drafted early, but then at the same time, you can get caught with your pants down, if you will, where like if you're in the later rounds and you're going with a more zero RB approach, those running backs just aren't available because people just keep drafting that position.
It's easy. It's much easier to be stronger at wide receiver on DraftKings. Like just kind of regardless of what you're doing. If you have that as a goal, it's easier to achieve that goal on DraftKings. So I'm kind of trying to think, it's almost like more like on FFPC, which tends to be a pretty running back heavy platform. I'm, kind of thinking about the best times to deviate from trying to be strong at receiver and grab the running backs, because there are going to be other wide receiver opportunities available later. Mm-hmm. One pocket for me on DraftKings is like, you can be sitting at like, the 11th round and get a receiver that you like.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of a breath of fresh air,
Yeah.
I'm not used to that. But if I know I can get that, if I know I can get wide receivers I like more in the 9th, if at the end of the 5th this morning, I got George Pickens, that's pretty sweet. I got Marvin Harrison at the end of the 3rd round instead of the beginning of the 3rd round. So there's spots where I'm like, okay, if I can sit here at the end of the 3rd, at the end of the 5th, if I can wait for receivers a little bit more later on, I'm not like pushing guys up around ahead of where I think they should actually go. So I actually have a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. Then I can use that to my advantage by also being strong at running back. And so, like I had a build this morning where I took McCaffrey. I was out of the 12 hole, I took McCaffrey, I took Brees, I took Travion Henderson, and I took DeAndre Swift. Mm-hmm. So like at every turn in the first 4 turns, first 4 pairs of picks, I took a running back. And then I didn't take my 5th running back till very late, but I basically kind of built balanced there, but I ended up feeling pretty strong at receiver because I also took a receiver with each of my first 4 pairs of picks as well. So, through 8, I had 4 running backs and 4 receivers, feeling pretty good about both positions. And then I filled out the depth at receiver on DraftKings in a way that I basically don't expect to if I'm not there.
So the other thing, this is kind of that point, but when you're drafting, like, are you more of a fan of doing fast drafts than slow drafts in this kind of environment? Because you can be more on, maybe this is wrong, but this is the way that I, after experiencing becoming a best ball bro last year and now switching over to DraftKings and trying to see what it's like here, like I've noticed that when I do fast drafts as opposed to slow drafts, I enjoy the fast draft environment more because I have a better pulse on what's going on in that draft. If that makes, is that a proper, like, is that the way that you feel too?
That's very much the way that I feel. I would even go like a step further and say, I don't trust myself to pay like as much attention in my slow drafts.
Right.
Like I'll just like like you get in the mode where you're like firing in picks.
Yeah.
And I've done, when I'm doing slow drafts, I'm like, I'll fire in picks and be like, wait, did that team have that guy? Because that was, was I supposed to stack there? I'm pretty sure yesterday I was definitely going to stack. And then I just like fired in a running back pick without thinking. Yeah. So for me, like being dialed in, so I'm paying attention to what's happening in the draft room, but I'm just like also paying more attention to my team, what I'm trying to accomplish. I feel way more in tune with what's going on, with everyone, including me, when I'm in a fast draft.
Yeah. I also think that in an environment where it does seem like people don't follow ADP as strongly, it's better to do that, to be on top of things and to do more fast drafts than slow drafts, because then you will be able to react properly and understand, oh yeah, this guy's slipping in this draft and I'll remember this, as opposed to like drafting 2 spots away from the turn and then completely forgetting that player was someone that you were targeting on the with your next pick and stuff.
So in this draft that I was doing this morning, I like set up, I had Travion Henderson. I ended up taking Kyle Williams. I had Brees Hall. I was setting up like a New England Jets thing, and Drake May goes like way ahead of ADP. So,
of course.
Like, I'm a big Drake May guy. I noticed that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
But there's one of the worst things is if you don't see that happen and you're like, oh, I'll just set up Drake May. Let me just go to take Drake May. Oh, he went around.
He's not there. Yeah.
So I do think it's paying attention to the draft is a huge edge, and I find it easier to do in a fast draft.
What about the fact that there are extra rounds? Different platforms you'll look at will have like 18, DraftKings has 20. With those extra rounds, how does that sort of shift your approach, or does it at all?
One way that it can shift your approach theoretically is that, you could do more at the onesie positions. Yeah. But on DraftKings, I find that quarterback can get pretty sketchy late in drafts. So I'm usually done at quarterback before those final rounds, but it does allow you to take 3 quarterbacks more easily because you have, that extra 20th round pick could be a 5th or 6th running back where, it might be a 4 running back build or, a 5 running back build where you don't have a ton of firepower up top if you want to try to add a 3rd quarterback. So the 3rd quarterback, it definitely makes that more comfortable, even though I'm rarely using a 19th or 20th round pick on a quarterback, if that makes sense. And then at tight end, I am more willing to just say, I'm taking a 3rd tight end in the final round.
Yeah.
Or even a 4th tight end. I'm more willing to do that on DraftKings with the 2 extra rounds to play around with. I think depending on the tournament you're in, you can also kind of take some of these bigger swings. I was going to take a Brashard Smith in the 19th round of this draft, got sniped, but that's the type of guy where I'm like, I don't know, like pretty wide open backfield. Actually, I know it's 7th round pick, but converted receiver, tested pretty well. So there's like, he could be nothing, but he could be something. And in DraftKings flagship tournament, it's a big final. You're going to need some really high scoring players. And so getting a guy who could spike out of the 20th round, even if it means taking on 0 risk, is something when you have an extra couple rounds that I'm more comfortable with.
So a lot of people listening to this, especially if they're newer to best ball, are going to be curious about how many of each position should they draft. And now I know that's a loaded question. I know that's a question that's like not easily answerable, but what's your typical mix look like with quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end? Like if you're, we have 20 players in this roster, I know that the mix depends on how you're spending your capital. You can surely talk about that as well, but what does your general mix look like, and what does your lineup construction just generally look like when things are all said and done?
Like 2 to 3 quarterbacks, 5 to 7 running backs, 8-ish receivers, fluctuating up and down a bit. Probably like 2 to 4 tight ends, probably 2 to 3 most of the time. But at the end of drafts, I'm trying to think about who can spike for me. The things I'm interested in are like correlated bets. Like I'm betting on the games I've already bet on, betting on the quarterbacks I've already bet on. So like I will take a Tutu Atwell or something that's kind of boring like that if I have a Matthew Stafford, and not really if I don't. But there's a lot of guys in that mix where I'll continue to add to a bet. I'll also, take a tight, like I think some of the tight ends have decent chance of spiking at least at the tight end position in the very final rounds, in ways that just if you're thinking about like who can be a hero for me in one of the single elimination playoff weeks, a guy like I like Harold Fannin. And I appreciate the 20th round so that I can take some Harold Fannin. At the end of the season, maybe they're seeing what they have in Harold Fannin, a big slot receiver with tight end eligibility. So that's the type of where I'm like, I took Harold Fannin at the 2001 in this draft. Xavier Estrepo was the next pick. Like,
right.
Who's more likely to like have a random spike week? To me, it's Fannin and it's at the tight end position. So yeah, I'm kind of at the end of the draft. I'm just kind of like, which guys can I dream on a little bit for the end of the season, whether that's because they're already attached to the stacks that I have. And so that I kind of know that team's going to be going off for me, right? Or the team's not very good anyway. So if that team's going off, pieces of this team are scoring points. Let me get a few more pieces of that team. Some rookies that might be interesting bets. And then the position of those rookies isn't so important unless I'm like, unless I only have 4 running backs to that point and I want to tack on a 5th or something.
Yeah. I mean, do you find yourself, like if you were to say what the split is between, like, let's say that you're past round 14, let's say you're in like round 15, 16. And so you're in like the clear late parts of your draft. where the guys that are available are clearly players that are not projected to score many fantasy points. Are you leaning far more on players that are expanding your existing stacks, or are you leaning more on the Harold Fannin non-Cleveland Brown stacks where you're just trying to get a dude that could hypothetically blow up because of his ambiguity of him being a rookie? Like, is there, you don't have to give a percentage lean or anything like that, but would you say that you go more towards the stacks than the individual players, or the individual players more than the stacks?
Probably more towards the stacks than the individual players, but it sort of depends on the way I've built the team. Like I talked about this team I built this morning that had 4 running backs and 4 receivers through 8. One of those receivers was Brandon Ayuk, and then my 5th receiver was Kyle Williams. And so on that team, in the 14th, I grabbed Romeo Doubs, and the 16th, I grabbed Josh Palmer, neither of which were stacked, but and I didn't have, and they weren't bringbacks either, but they're guys who I'm just like, yeah, you play receiver, you know, like
you're gonna routes,
yeah, and they're cheap. I'm not paying a ton for the routes, and I've got a guy coming back off a multi-ligament knee tear and a rookie, so I would like pretty cheaply, I would say, but I would like to pay for some guys who run routes. And then my last receiver on that team was stacked with Stafford and Puka, Tutu Atwell. So, and I had Jarquez Hunter there. So I did a Rams thing. So it's like, it depends a little bit on if I feel like the team needs something.
Yeah.
For example, if it had a different receiver room, if I had like some veterans kind of in those middle rounds, like if I had built it more on like Calvin Ridley's and Cooper, or not Cooper. Well, Cooper Kupp's a decent example. Calvin Ridley, like Cooper Kupp, Cortland Sutton, like it's kind of veterans,
projectable players,
projectable veteran, Then like a Jalen Noel starts to look unstacked. Jalen Noel starts to look pretty interesting. Unstacked Jack Best starts to look pretty interesting. Like, how do I get some like late season upside on this team at wide receiver? So a lot of it's about like what the team I feel like is missing at that point at that position. But if I have a tie, I'm definitely using stacking to help break me towards that player.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, though, and one that was stressed a lot on this show last year was the idea that what you're doing early in your draft needs to dictate what you do later in your draft, right? And that can go from like, what I think is interesting, what you just talked about is that's a player archetype thing that you're referring to, whereas a lot of people will take it in a more like mundane way and think of it in a more like general way of, oh, you went RB times 3 to start your draft. Like, then don't draft, maybe get 1 or 2 more late as opposed to, getting one in like round 8, round 9. That's the obvious way to sort of balance your roster, right? But what you're talking about too is just like the archetype. Like if you're getting Chris Godwin and Brandon Ayuk and whomever, might not be ready to start the season.
Diggs.
Make sure you're getting a foundation that of players that are not, up in the air with what their usage might look like to start the season, which the 2 that you named, I think are like quintessential examples of that with Romeo Doubs and Josh Palmer, where it's like, they're going to be running routes for their roster and for their team. And those are both high powered offense or like good offenses. Yeah. They could easily give you some spiked weeks.
And I'm working on this article that'll be out later this week. My draft plan right now. And, like Dobbs is not exciting, but he goes in the 14th and like, what's really the difference between him and Rashad Bateman, who goes the 10th.
Yeah.
So these guys were like, I don't want to pay too much for routes. If there's, Bateman in this draft this morning when I had a Luther Burden, like, no, thanks. Give me Luther, give me that upside first.
Yeah.
But this is a tournament where you need massive upside in week 17. You got to beat over 1,000 people in the final. Mm-hmm. So that's the first priority. Like, let me make sure I have a team that actually is built to win. But I do have to clear an advance rate bar, right? And that advance rate's 14 weeks of the season, so I can't ignore that. So finding the guys who can kind of help you do that cheaply is really nice. And I don't mind paying a premium for some of the late season production, especially if I can find that cheaply. I would also, I think the archetype stuff is a pretty big edge at this point because some of the more basic structural drafting stuff has become more ingrained.
Yeah.
One thing I would note as well is like, if you if you have more running back production, like this team, as I mentioned, was pretty strong at running back, and it's got like a Swift and a McCaffrey and a Hall. It's like, it had Henderson too, but it's not primarily built late season in the running back. Like I expect to score points at running back early.
Yeah.
That allows me to take more risks at receiver because I think running back's probably hitting my flex a decent amount early in the season.
Yeah.
And so receiver can kind of come online a little bit more as the season progresses. And I can just like, it's not that Palmer and Dobbs are going to be crushing for me early in the season, but they're just mixing in enough.
Yeah.
And then I have guys who are more back weighted who are going to be coming on as the season progresses. And running back is really what's helping me kind of get to that point.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Now, we've been talking stacking, and I know there's going to be people listening to the show that haven't really been super, super involved in best ball just yet. Hopefully this show changes things and you guys get more invested and you really like dig what, is out there. But stacking is obviously a really big thing because we're looking at ceiling outcomes for these players, and we're looking at what they can do in an individual week and spiking that individual week. And so if there's a connection between quarterback and wide receiver and they throw a touchdown, let's say, then you're getting double the points, if you will, and you know that they're both hitting your lineup. But my question to you is, how important and vital is stacking for you? Like how much you go out of your way to get that stack going, but then also how deep do your stacks get? And I mean that from, the number of pass catchers you'll usually use. And then also, are you using running backs as part of that stack?
Yeah, I am using running backs as part of the stack. I'm willing to get fairly deep with the stacks. I'm willing to kind of team stack stuff. I'm willing to stack without the quarterback. I've written a decent amount about this because I think it really keeps you flexible. Like, I mentioned I did like a Breece Hall, Travion Henderson. Drake may get sniped. What do? I take Kyle Williams and I take Hunter Henry. Like I have a stack of two teams that play each other in week 17. I'm hoping that game goes nuts, but I have Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, and Matthew Stafford. If I don't have Drake May, like, that's fine. Whatever.
Yeah.
Like I have Dak stacked up with Pickens. I've got Purdy stacked up with McCaffrey and Ayuk. I've got Stafford stacked up with Puka, Tutu, Jarquez Hunter. Like one of these quarterbacks is going off for me because they have to, because they're bringing along like first two picks of the draft are paired with on the same team with the quarterback. So I need those dudes. I need Puka. I need McCaffrey. So the quarterback of one of the teams is probably coming along. And if not, I even have a third option of a guy who's also stacked that can hit my lineup in a big way. But then I also am going to need, in addition to that stack going off, an enormous amount of points, like just a bunch. So let me capture several more scores all hitting my lineup together by being right about a game that goes off. And when I'm looking at that game, like if I'm looking at the Jets and the Patriots, or if I'm, looking at any other game, I'm not usually entering a draft being like, man, I really like the Bengals and the Cardinals to go nuts in week 17. Let me take that game, or let me look at the dome games and try to target those. I'm doing that less than I'm saying like, let me look at who I drafted and where I drafted them and what this team needs to happen for it to win a final that's got over 1,000 people in it.
Yeah.
This team needs Puka to go off. It needs McCaffrey to go off. Like those become pretty interesting games to stack. So these early picks that I've made, I'm more likely to try to tack on correlation and see if I can get the quarterback involved in that. But if I don't, kind of good almost, because my goal is to have all my quarterbacks stacked and additional stacking elements as well, because I'm not going to be right about all of it. I'm not even going to have to utilize all of it.
Yeah. Something that really resonated with me actually happened a few years ago whenever I was doing some research on like stacking and season long. And I got a question about stacking and season long. And fortunately, our friend Mike Leone at Established to Run had done an article, one of like the very first articles on just like research behind stacking, as opposed to like, we all know that stacking inherently makes sense, but there was more like data backing it and stuff like that. And one of the things that Leone wrote about that I've been kind of touching on and talking to people about, I'm curious if this is top of mind for you while you're drafting, but it's the idea that when you are getting those other stacks also, like, you didn't get the Drake May pick, but you have this New England stack. The other piece that's really important there is that if New England happens to be the offense that really exceeds expectation in 2025, then all of a sudden you have pieces of that off. Because like when I do ADP analysis across the board, if a player is in a good offense, he will generally exceed expectation. And it's definitely when a player is in a bad offense, the opposite's happening, right? And so if you have Kyle Williams and Travion Henderson, and New England happens to be the offense that scores 45 touchdowns this year when they were projected at 35 touchdowns, then all of a sudden those players are naturally going to be elevated. And so that's part of the equation for stacking for you as well, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. Yeah. You kind of can win in multiple ways. You can win with those guys being huge hits for the season. You can win in them spiking in one of the playoff weeks. They can spike in multiple of the playoff weeks. They can be great in the regular season and spike in the playoffs. And yeah, I mean, that's why I am interested in stacking, with the running backs, because that's where you just like, this team is good.
Yes.
Like
they're undervalued. Yeah.
They're undervalued. The Texans a couple years ago, Stroud was a rookie. Like you just like Texans were good. Texans would have been even better if, Tank Dell hadn't gotten hurt. So like it looked at one point like you're going to basically need to have bet on the Texans to win these tournaments. So I think that especially like late, you can build some interesting stuff. I do take Cam Ward was a prospect I really struggled to get on board with for a while. Ultimately ended up feeling like, yeah, he has the ceiling to kind of be worth taking on some of the bust risk that I do think he has. But I like him in best ball because if he hits, he's going to elevate a bunch of fairly cheap players. Yeah. Like the Titans are not priced like they're going to be good. You can tack on some of the rookie dart throws. You get underpriced Pollard. Pollard might be not underpriced. It might be overpriced if Ward stinks. But if Ward's really good, then Pollard, Spears, Ridley, like all these guys, like even Okonkwo, like you can kind of win with multiple pieces of your lineup by just making one like pretty plausible bet. The number one overall pick is good, So yeah, being able to like be right about one thing and then having that affect both your regular season and your playoffs in a really crucial way is that's part of the why stacking is enticing.
The one question I do want to ask too, because I think this kind of hurt me last year when I was playing a lot more, was that I fell in love with offenses that I probably shouldn't have fallen in love with. And I was too, like, for instance, I really like Tennessee's offense and placing bets on Tennessee's offense, when in hindsight, I was clearly too bullish on like I wasn't factoring in enough the obvious Will Levis being a potato and just, not being able to take the next step, which was the probable outcome if we're being honest, right?
Did the Mayo commercials get you?
Yeah, apparently. But like it was, I really liked getting both Spears and Pollard, and obviously Pollard worked out, but like Tennessee was an offense that I invested in thinking, oh, if this is the offense that blows up this year and takes the next step, because, Brian Callahan as coming as head coach and what he did in Cincinnati. And it really just came down to, if Will Levis hits, then this is going to be great for, where I'm drafting these players right now. And now I know that I can make the exact same argument for like Tampa Bay last year, right? I wasn't high enough on Tampa Bay, but like if you were high on Tampa Bay and you drafted Tampa Bay players, then you obviously, came out on top. But my question to you is more so, are you singling out those teams? Because the more I've thought about this, and this is me kind of workshopping this on the fly, but the more that I've thought about this, there's only going to be maybe one or two of those teams that really pop in a given year, that come out of nowhere, that, seem that like most of the teams that do well offensively, and I'm talking like league winning well, were projected to do well in the first place. Right. And so my question is, are you seeking those teams out and then just drafting them, or are you just kind of letting the draft flow and then you'll see which teams you end up kind of being higher on naturally and more organically?
I think it's probably a better process to let the draft flow.
Right. Right.
And then you have your guys, like if you're taking players that you like, like I have rankings and I use those rankings to figure out which players to take. And so I'm going to end up being a little bit more overweight on the teams I'm more excited about. But there's something to be said for just like building coherent teams. Like, you're not going to win these tournaments with a portfolio. The best portfolio does not win. A single team wins. So a team that is built around what you already did is more likely to win than like jamming in your favorite guys every time when it doesn't really make sense on that particular team. I was my version of the Titans last year was the Patriots, where they were just too bad to take advantage of the fact that Drake May is actually really good, which was my whole bet. I was like, this guy's going to be really good.
You got that right. You got that piece right.
I know. It still didn't matter. They were so bad. It didn't matter. But like he, you know, the way I had it ranked, Jaden Daniels was also a target. I did a truth serum take for Pete Overzet's channel where I was basically like, I'm screwing this up by not taking enough Jaden Daniels. It's a big mistake. Yeah. I took a little bit more at the end, but that truth serum take was recorded pretty late in the summer. It was the damage had been done mostly. Yeah. Bo Nix was a guy that I thought was a really good pick. I didn't have nearly as much as I should have because I was just drafting Drake May instead. So I think the willingness to just like let stuff fall to you, pushing down that feeling of like, oh, I gotta get my guy. I'm not gonna have my guy on this. This team's so good, and it's not gonna have the league winner who I know for a fact who it is.
That's the feeling. That there is the feeling that I feel all the time. And I'm glad that you brought that up because people are going to feel that feeling. And what you're saying is,
I think it's a bad feeling. I think that's
it's a bad feeling. Yeah.
I think that's leading you down the wrong path. Where what you should be trying to do is figure out what this team needs. Like, what is the win condition for this team? Like, what have you already said is going to happen? Yeah. And then try to reinforce, you know, this team's chances rather than kind of glomming on the same thing you tend to do in every draft. And I mean, that's also a good way to mix up your portfolio. So we have this article last year that Sacrilegious wrote about Jacquard similarity and how the idea there is like, it's not enough to just mix up the players you're drafting. You actually want teams that are distinctly different from one another. Yeah. So that you have literal multiple paths to having a good season through these teams that are built differently and don't just like overlap like 10, 11 players of overlap and then they're different around the edges. Like you're making an extremely correlated bet when you do that, instead of creating an actual portfolio of teams that can win in multiple different types of seasons. And I know, like, I struggle with this myself, but like, if you just tack on, you know, Jalen Polk and Drake May and Antonio Gibson, you know,
I was there with Gibson too. There with Gibson.
Yeah. Hunter Henry kind of worked, but you know, if you do that, like on every team, I was like, there's the part where I draft 4 Patriots. It makes your teams too similar and it boxes you out from other bets. And, you know, hey, man, you had a Bronco on that team. Would have been a pretty good team to do that same idea, but actually use the Bo Nix hit, which you didn't have enough of. I think that a lot of that, though, is also a bias inherently where you're like, hey, we're in the late rounds. It doesn't matter if I get this wrong. You know, like it's this idea that you're in round 15 to 17 and you're like, oh, I'm just going to go to my trusty old Patriots because if I get this wrong, you know, sure, it's going to be wrong on a lot of my teams, but surely this isn't going to sink my team. But at the end of the day, like, you need every spot. No, like that's an important part of what best ball is like the survivorship of your team and making sure that like all of those pieces are still usable into the playoff weeks, right? So is that part of it too, where like you still need to differentiate in the late rounds, whereas in your season long leagues, right? In your season long leagues, you're probably going to take the same exact favorite sleeper that you love, because if he doesn't pan out, okay, you'll just replace him with someone else. 100%. And like, you can swing, you know, you're swinging for the fence. So you know, in season long, it's like, just give me Drake May. I think he has a much higher ceiling. You know, if I'm forgoing like a good solid hit in Bo Nix, like, who cares? Well, in best ball, like, you care. You really care. Having that guy who's a hit for you in the late rounds, even for a single week at the end of the season, becomes massive. Like, these final round picks super do matter. They become one of the easiest ways to get through the single elimination weeks. If you're getting a spike week out of a free player, out of a $1 auction player, right? Like, you have no business getting a spike week out of this guy. If you're able to do that, if you're able to get multiple pieces hitting your team because you found a cheap team to stack up.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you're like, you've really improved your chances of doing something very, very difficult, which is getting to the final. You have to win 2 single elimination weeks. It's a really high bar to do that. And so if these late round picks are zeros for you, you're really playing with one arm tied behind your back, even though individually they're all kind of like dart throws. The teams that win these tournaments are very likely to have gotten production out of these picks at some point in the playoff weeks and potentially in the final.
Yeah. Something that needs to be said too, because this is something that, because you were the first guest on Becoming Best Ball Bro last year as well, with the series. And one of the things that you said sort of is in line with what you're saying here, where it's draft for your team, don't worry about, like, there's going to be a falling value that you might have to forego because it doesn't fit what your team needs. And one of the very clear examples to me on DraftKings right now is with Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts, where there are many times where you start out a draft with, you could go with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Trey McBride to get the week 17 correlation going, game stack going. And then right now, Joe Burrow has higher ADP on DK than Jalen Hurts does, which, like, to me, my projections don't have that. And my rankings don't have that. But I got to ask you, because people are going to run into this, and I think it's just a good, like, hypothetical / it's a real life example. Like, in that scenario where you have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Trey McBride, you're drafting Joe Burrow over Jalen Hurts, no?
Probably not, actually.
Okay.
Because
I'm curious. That's why I wanted to ask. Yeah.
I mean, in this case, like, Jalen Hurts can just, like, soak up the Eagles' offensive points himself. He can score all the rushing touchdowns. He's going to throw for all the touchdowns. So he can have, like, an individual mega spike week that doesn't even bring other pieces along. Mm-hmm. And he's going in the 5th round.
I have so much Jalen Hurts, by the way, because of that ADP.
He's just an awesome pick.
It's very hard for me to not draft. Not only that, but AJ Brown's falls sometimes. It's very easy to get that stack. And so it's just, Anyway, keep going.
So, I mean, I don't know. I think, to me, the Burrow example would go to kind of stacking without the quarterback. Like, oh no, I have T. Higgins and Trey McBride, I get, I don't know, you tack on Michael Wilson or something, you get one of the running backs.
Sure.
Great. I'm betting on this high scoring game to be high scoring. Like, that we were all hoping that game's high scoring, expect it to be a good game, even though it's months and months away. Great. If that game is high scoring, I really benefit. At the same time, I have Jalen Hurts as my quarterback, who I paid a 5th round price tag for, when other guys are drafting their quarterback in the 2nd round.
Yeah.
So I think you need to score just an insane amount of points, and that means that in some ways you need to bet on multiple things at once to happen.
Yeah. Forcing
me to take, like, Burrow in this draft this morning went in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
No thanks. That's just, like, too expensive for a guy who's really a pocket passer. He's a huge spike week upside guy, but he's not one of these dual threat elites.
Right.
Let me wait 2 rounds and get a dual threat elite instead.
Yeah, no, it's just it's been an interesting dilemma for me, and a question that's been top of mind for me. I didn't know which direction to go, clearly, but when I was asking the question, but my direction that I've gone just in general in that range of quarterback has just been Jalen Hurts, because has it been the tush push thing as to why his ADP is where it's at? It's just very confusing to me.
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because on DraftKings you had the opening ADPs, like in the pre-draft contest, had Josh Allen in, like, the early 2nd.
Yeah.
And then Jalen Hurts was kind of always at the, like, 4 or 5 turn. So the gap has actually shrunk.
Strange.
I really don't know.
Yeah, it's been strange. And I've literally not talked to any other analyst or drafter about the Hurts thing in particular. So it's good to hear that take. All right, before I let you go, any specific targets out there that people should be looking at on DraftKings that you've been drafting a lot?
I do like, I like Luther Burden a lot. He's, for whatever reason, he's been way cheaper on DraftKings the entire way. You can, like, pre-draft, he was like in the hundreds, and now he's kind of down further, in, like, the 120-ish range. going behind other rookie receivers that I like him better than, like Jaden Higgins, Trey Harris. Where did Burden? I know he's number 1 in the pre-draft model for you. Where did he end up finishing?
He's right. So he's 4 behind Travis Hunter, Tet, Egbuka, and then him. But he's still in the elite producer category. So he's one of only like 5 wide receivers in the model's database that went day 2 that's still an elite producer. And the other guys were all like I say the names and people are like, oh, that's not a great, but it's like Tyler Boyd and Juju Smith-Schuster and like guys who had good early career production and that were really usable and good. So I'm very much in on Burden as the talent, still very much in, even though he got 2nd round capital.
Yeah, he just seems way too cheap. And then, one thing I'll just mention about DraftKings for people that are maybe a little newer to it is that the ADP does shift quite a bit faster in a way that I think is often sharp, where news gets baked in quicker. Yeah. But at the same time, we don't have that much news right now. And so like he's dealing with a soft tissue injury is enough for people to kind of panic a little bit. So I think this is actually, in my opinion, a good time to buy Burden where he's falling on. Now it's risky. Maybe the soft tissue injury lingers and lingers. Yeah. But I think on DraftKings, you can count on that type of stuff to have been baked into the ADP a little bit more, as opposed to just kind of like waiting forever and ever and ever and hoping you get a discount. Yeah. I think you'll see the discount materialize a little bit more quickly. You will also see guys rise on news much, much faster. So that's something to be aware of. But a couple other guys that I really like this year, 3 guys. I really like the top 3 tight ends this year. And
me too. Yeah.
Elite tight end is kind of taken a bit of a hit the last couple years, although drafting elite tight end 2 years ago ended up being pretty good, but not for the regular season. It was a playoff thing. It was a Kittle thing. Last year we had, a crop that I was into. We had these veterans that I thought were going to hang on. Yeah. We had some of the younger guys coming up, but it didn't end up being a good group. The veterans fell off. The younger guys didn't really emerge as much as we were hoping, except for Trey McBride, who did emerge and is now going, in the 3rd round when he's a PPR machine. Right. All we really need is touchdown regression, and he's going to smash a 3rd round ADP. Right. And then you have Brock Bowers, who's one of the best tight end prospects ever, has the best tight end rookie season ever, gets massive upgrades at coaching, quarterback. You want to look at like play volume, just efficiency of the offense. Doesn't have that much target competition. Already kind of dealt with Jacoby Myers. Already was the number 1 receiver over Myers last year. Besh is kind of interesting, but I don't think someone that really should like strike fear in our hearts as if you're betting Bowers. For Bowers. Yeah. And this dude, he was 3rd in receptions last year in the NFL. Only Jamar Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown had more receptions than this guy. So on a full PPR site, on a site too, where I think like really like because of the bonuses and stuff on DraftKings, having the guys that you need, it's like a best ball expression that's kind of a trope, but like, is he the guy you need? But you need the guys you need here. Like you really, if Bowers has a crazy spike week at tight end, you're going to get the bonuses. You're going to get the full point PPR. You're going to really want Bowers. And he has, I really feel strongly that he has that kind of single week ceiling in addition to just maybe being one of the dudes who the season is kind of about.
Yeah. I've been shocked at George Kittle's ADP.
Another awesome pick.
Him and Hurts both. Like I'm like way ahead of the market. I'm getting them in like the 4th and 5th constantly. Like when I'm on the end there, like it's just such an easy kind of turn type pick. And even if I'm reaching a little bit by ADP, like my projections right now, and I don't draft based on projections. I just use it as like a guideline for me to kind of like see where things are at. My projections have McBride and George Kittle like really close, like 0.1 point per game like difference between the two. And so I see it similarly where like there's a big 3 tight end and I'm getting all of them where I can, when I'm depending on the spot that I'm in. But of the 3, I seem to be falling to George. Like George Kittle is on like an obscene number of my teams so far because there's just a discount there in that, he's just an easy click. The 49ers in general are easier than I expected to stack.
I agree. I have a lot of 49er stacks. I like Juwan Jennings, which is not, I can't tell if I'm like Juwan Jennings is either one of these fun kind of late career breakouts that's like a Miles Austin or a Victor Cruz or something like that, or it's like the Marquez Callaway thing, or we're Russell Gage was the name I was looking for.
Oh,
we're
Gage
like,
is a good one, yeah.
He's the guy. He's a guy now. You can definitely draft Russell Gage in the 8th round. It won't burn you. And then it's like, oh yeah, this veteran who was like never good and had like a few good games that one year turned out not to be a good receiver after all. Like this was very obvious,
Jennings feels like the parabola meme where it's the guy there's just like draft Juwan Jennings, he scored a lot of points last year, and then the middle of it is like all these calculations being like, we haven't seen a player like Juwan Jennings before, and then like the expert at the end is like draft Juwan Jennings, because I feel the same way about Jennings.
I'm on one of the two ends, but I just don't know which.
You don't know if you're just giving the basic take or what. But that's it's good insight for sure. Yeah, I really appreciate the time, man. This was awesome. I think people are definitely going to get a lot out of it. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that great stuff over at Legendary Upside.
Yeah, all my stuff is over at Legendary Upside. As I mentioned, I'm going to have a draft plan article out this week. We've had some really good content on the site by Matt Irby going through some of the regression analysis I was mentioning with Trey McBride. Got underdog rankings, DraftKings rankings. We're going to be launching FFPC rankings. And we also have a dynamic rankings tool called the Sidekick. Is an overlay that you draft alongside with and helps keep track of some of the stuff we've been talking about, like what you've been betting on in terms of the correlations and the teams and all of that. And have some news on upgrades of that coming out in the next week or so as well, which we'll announce on the Legendary Upside newsletter and on Legendary Upside YouTube channel.
Yeah, definitely check it out, guys. Pat puts out awesome content all the time, and take a look at his YouTube and the live streams that he's doing. All my stuff can be found on lateround.com. Make sure you are subscribed to the newsletter and subscribe to this podcast, and you're pre-ordering the draft guide, and you're checking out the prospect guide, all that good stuff over on lateround.com. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.